All right, we have been doing this sermon series about the colorful stories in the Bible, and this story is colorful and fun and strange too. I happen to really love this story because Jesus is like, hey, the first sign of my glory will be I'm going to keep the party going. It's a bit of a strange miracle, right? Like John's gospel is broken up into seven, like the whole way that John's gospel is framed and structured, the outline is there were 7 signs that Jesus did during the Gospel of John, and then there's the 8th sign, which is his resurrection. And some of these signs and stories and miracles include feeding of like 5,000 people, or giving sight to the blind, or healing broken bodies, or giving life to poor dead Lazarus. If Jesus doesn't give life to Lazarus, Lazarus stays what? Dead. If Jesus doesn't restore sight to the blind person stays blind. If the bodies aren't healed, the bodies remain broken, unhealed, sick. If Jesus doesn't turn the water into wine, people sober up. Like people aren't able to maintain their buzz. This is the first sign. Like this is the inaugural miracle of the Gospel of John. Welcome to the Gospel of John. Jesus enjoys a good party. Oh, I totally forgot. When I was working the sermon out with Melissa last night, we thought that I should add Jesus' first miracle is, and then put up a sign of Wayne going, party on, Garth. From Wayne's World. Yeah, there we go. But I forgot, so I just explained it to you. Nevertheless, Jesus' first sign, Jesus' first miracle in the Gospel of John is strange. It's a strange and odd and colorful miracle, right? Not the kind that you would necessarily believe that the Son of God would begin his ministry with. There's all kinds of things going on in the story, and to really delve deep into understanding why did Jesus want to begin with this miracle? Why did the author of the Gospel of John want to begin with this being the first sign? There's a couple things that we need to know about wine in the first century Near Eastern world. There were several different ways in which you could drink wine or store wine. If you were going to a party and it was like a short party, or you were having guests over, or you just had your personal wine with you, you would carry it in, next slide. So your left, there's a wine skin. It's just animal skin that had been cut and dried in the sun, and then you could pour your wine into this wine skin and have it with you so that you could drink it, I guess, kind of, I don't know, like on the go, yeah, totally. Wherever you were, you could have your wine with you. You could sling it over your shoulder and just constantly have some wine with you. This was a wine skin, and it couldn't hold very much wine, and it wouldn't stay good for very long. And so at parties, at celebrations, at weddings, you would use amphorae, which is the jars to your right. And those were like big so that you could put lots of wine in it, and it was shaped in such a way that it was easy to pour into cups. And it was also shaped in such a way that you could cork it so that weird things couldn't necessarily get into it during the life of the party. Are we clear? All right. These, are we having phone calls? Very cool. All right. Tell them hello. At this wedding, there would have been a whole lot of amphorae jars filled with wine. The jars that Jesus asks the servants to fill are on the next slide. They're those large jars that are like basically so heavy that they're like on the ground. You can't move them. And they're actually these water basins for the Jewish ritual of cleansing. And at a party, you needed to have these large water basins for ritual cleansing, because if you were a good Jew, there were all kinds of ways in which you could become spiritually sick. You could somehow break kosher, and you would need to wash your hands to rinse yourself clean of the spiritual imperfections that you had experienced. Kosher laws demand that things that are both maybe good can't necessarily be connected, can't touch. If you're at a party, you might touch meat. Meat's fine, meat's good, and hey there, you're good too. Meat is good, but it's been killed, it's dead. And so there's like this dead energy to it. Milk, you can easily see yourself engaged in like drinking some milk at a party or having milk around, and if you had touched that, milk, which is the source of life, is the opposite of meat, and so these two things couldn't connect, and if you had touched both, you were like sick. And Torah and kosher laws have all these laws and rules for how to keep things separate from one another that have like different energies, if you will. And if you had put these two different things together, you could become spiritually sick. You could inherit what was called, the Hebrew word is a tumah. It's a spiritual disease because you had become contaminated. And this could easily happen at a wedding, at a party, and so you needed to have lots and lots of Jewish water basins to remain ritually pure and clean. You could rinse your hands so that you would stay clean. Wine in wineskin, wine and in porai is good. And water in a water basin for Jewish ritual purification is good. But it would be sacrilegious to put wine in one of those water basins. And yet this is exactly what Jesus has the servants do. There were all kinds of amphorae around. There was all kinds of water jars, wine jars that could have been used. Fill them with water, turn them into wine. Jesus flagrantly violates kosher laws as the very first sign and miracle in the Gospel of John. He goes out of his way to flagrantly disregard kosher laws as his first sign and miracle. This is even weirder now, right? Why does Jesus do this? Why would Jesus begin his ministry this way? I have 4 observations. Some preachers do 3-point sermons. I don't know how. I got 4 observations. So I have 4 observations that we'll go through and share about this particular story. The first observation is John begins the gospel. Jesus begins his ministry this way because Jesus and his ministry and his life is always about confronting and challenging religious structures. It's not that religion in and of itself is a bad thing. I mean, we're all here for some reason, right? But Jesus knows that all too often, far too easily, humans can take the good that is supposed to be religion and turn it into something that's harmful and destructive. Religion, the word religion, lig, the root word for ligament, it's literally the word is about reconnecting, ligamitizing. It's still not a word. It's not a word, but like you get the point. It's about reconnecting us. It's about us being able to reconnect to our true self. It's about us being able to connect to the deepest self of the universe, to God, to love itself. That's what religion is supposed to be. And yet, how many of us have experienced a religion that puts all kinds of boundaries and barriers between people being able to reconnect with God and themselves? How easy is it for humans to turn religion into something not connecting us to one another and to God, but actually dividing us and actually making it harder for us to connect to one another, harder for us to connect to ourselves, and harder for us to connect to God, to the divine, to the universe, to ultimate reality. And so Jesus, his whole ministry is constantly pushing up against any boundary, any barrier, anything that would cause people to experience religion as harm. Jesus just smashes. Jesus challenges Sabbath rules because he's going to heal on the Sabbath. Jesus challenges laws about how humans are supposed to interact with one another, and he touches people that are considered untouchable, and he has interactions with people that challenge the sexist paradigms of his day. Jesus is constantly challenging the religious structures. It's almost like this. Jesus thinks that some people are selling water by the river. That some people are like, here, have some water. Let me sell you some water. Let me sell you a water bottle. And Jesus is like, stop selling water. The river, life, full and abundant life is right here. So Jesus' entire ministry, Jesus will challenge religious structures that make it harder for people to have access to the waters of life, to full and abundant life. The second observation I would make about this story is that Jesus' ministry in this story and throughout his entire life, Jesus is going to be confronting dualism. Dualism is a great word to use at a cocktail party. Be like, are you dualistic? Do you have a dualistic perspective? And for those of you who don't know what the word dualism means, just simply put, it's like this. We have a tendency to separate things in our lives. We have a tendency to put things into the sacred and the spiritual and the ethereal, and to say that's different than the material world. We have a tendency of breaking things up into there's the sacred and spiritual, ethereal, beautiful things, and then there's profane things or material things. Life here. By the way, when you Google profane images, next slide, that's the best you can hope for. So on your left, spiritual, because there's you Google a spiritual image and you get some kind of roller coaster up into heavens. And then on the right, when you Google profane, you get, if you're lucky, you get these clean images. So we have this tendency in dualistic thinking to separate things spiritual, sacred, or profane. Or the next slide, we have a tendency of separating things being spiritual and things being ordinary. And somehow we give preference to the spiritual, ethereal things. Jesus, in this miracle, takes some basic, ordinary, boring water and says, this water is more than ordinary, boring water. This is somehow steeped in the miraculous. We experience this every single Sunday when we take some ordinary bread and some ordinary wine and we say, there's something else going on. There is a depth and a dimension to what is going on in this bread and this wine. It's so easy to say it's just water. It's so easy to say it's just bread, it's just wine. It's so easy to say it's just my 9-to-5 job. It's so easy to say it's just family life. It's so easy to say it's just church. It's so easy to say it's just the ordinary, boring. And yet Jesus is reminding us in this story that the ordinary is steeped in the miraculous. That we don't need to be dualistic. That we can see everything as sacred and everything as spiritual. Third observation I have, and this took me a while to figure out the right title for this observation, because I wanted to go with the Beatles and say Mother Mary whispers to me, but then I thought, nope, if I can make a reference to a really weird 90s movie, I'm going to do it. So this observation is, there's something about Mary. There is something about Mary. When Melissa and I were talking about this story, my best sermons always come because she and I have been talking it through and talking it out. She had such a depth of perspective. But we were talking about the story and we were like, Mary has a significant role in this story. Mary's the one that pushes Jesus. And we were saying we want to be the kind of parents that know our kids so well that we know their calling. We know their vocation. We know the calling on their life. This story isn't like Mother Mary saying, hey, Jesus, do this thing. And he's like, no, Mom. And she's like, I'm going to ignore your requests. Hey, come here and do whatever he says. The story is actually Mary knowing that something needs to happen and saying to Jesus, hey, this is your calling. This is what you're here to do. And Jesus is like, it's not my time yet. And Mother Mary looks at Jesus and says, it is your time. Mary doesn't put her dreams and her wishes and her plans onto her son. She knows her son so well that she knows the calling and the passion and the pursuit that's been placed on his life. And so she's like, no, this is your moment. This is your time. This is the time to begin your ministry. It's almost as if Mother Mary whispers to him this amazing Rumi quote. This mystic, he says, stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. This story, in part, is here. It's still surviving, it's still enduring because we, as we read it, are called to hear God speaking to us, or maybe Mary speaking to us, saying, stop being small. Stop pretending like you don't have a huge calling on your life. Stop pretending like, I'll just stay in my little corner and do my thing. Because the calling on all of our hearts and all of our lives is to participate in God and bringing life to the whole world. That's no small thing. So Mary whispers to her son, it's your time. Believe in you. Do your thing. Do your thing. May we, who are parents, may we who are uncles or aunts or guardians, may we do the same with our kids, the people that we've been entrusted with. May we as a church, this is tough, may we as a church do that with our kids in this community, trusting their calling, trusting the way they express their spirituality. May we not put rules on them how we're going to do things in church. May we allow them to express their faith and their spirituality. And the fourth observation, the final observation would be, in this story we hear Jesus inviting us to the party. Jesus does extend the life of the party because Jesus wants us to be aware that life itself is a party. Jesus begins his ministry by bringing the wine to the table, by saying party on, because Jesus wants all of us to know that we are invited to the party that is called life, that this is an amazing gift. We all have breath. Are we just breathing or are we living? We are invited to a party to celebrate life itself. And so Jesus begins his ministry this way because Jesus wants to invite all of us to the extended party, to life itself as a celebration and party. Jesus wants all of us to be that excited about life, to think of it as a party. Frederick Buechner once said that grace is like this. God looked at the entire universe and said the party wouldn't be the same if you weren't somehow part of the party. Jesus is inviting all of us to see life as his gift and this party. This amazing author, Mary Oliver, once said, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Jesus wants us to experience this one wild and precious life. So Jesus is asking and calling us to confront religious structures that keep others from experiencing this one wild, precious, fragile life. Jesus wants us to confront dualistic thinking that prevents us from experiencing all of life as sacred and spiritual and the party. Jesus wants us to hear what he heard from Mary, saying, you have this one precious, fragile life, wild life. Do your thing. Life is too short to not do your thing and to live into your calling. Jesus is inviting us to see all of life as a party, all of life as a gift. Jesus is here in this story. Jesus is here in all these stories, and Jesus is here in this moment, calling us to confront structures that get in the way of life, to confront and challenge ways of thinking that get in the way of us experiencing all of life as beautiful, to move, to get off our seats, and to do the things that we're called to do, and to experience life as precious and wild and fragile. May you experience that Jesus. And may, as we sing this song, Jesus is here, may you experience that wild, precious life, and may you take it with you.